Welcome, everyone. It's time to start our event today. And welcome to Read for Peace, celebrating the freedom to read in libraries. Presented by IFLA's Management of Library Associations, MLAS, in collaboration with the Freedom of Access to Information and Freedom of Expression Advisory Committee, FAIFE, to commemorate Banned Books Week. As in previous years, we are celebrating the Freedom to Read and Banned Books Week, an initiative from the American Library Association that seeks to bring together the entire book community, librarians, booksellers, publishers, journalists, teachers, and readers of all types in shared support of the freedom to seek and to express ideas. My name is Loida Garcia Fibo. I am the chair of MLAS, IFLA Management of Library Associations, and we are delighted to collaborate with FAIFE. And I would like to invite Jonathan Hernandez, the chair of FAIFE, to give us welcoming remarks as well.
Thank you, Loida, and welcome everyone. Sorry, we are so glad you're here to join this important conversation aligned with Banned Books Week, as Loida mentioned. So FAIFE it's at the heart of IFLA efforts to promote intellectual freedom, and we are glad to have this collaboration again, led by MLAS, always supporting freedom to read. So freedom to read is under attack. Across many countries, books are being challenged and removed from library shelves. Also, drag queen storytelling has been censored in many countries, and there are many other attempts to restrict ideas and silence voices that are on the rise. So today we'll explore the crucial role libraries play in promoting intellectual freedom and building peaceful communities, and how we can all advocate for the freedom to read and protect this essential right. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers, so welcome everyone again.
Thank you, Jonathan. Today's event, Read for Peace, celebrating the freedom to read in libraries, is vital in promoting the fundamental right to access to information and diverse perspectives. In an age when censorship and misinformation can stifle dialogue, this celebration underscores the role of libraries as sanctuaries for free thought and expression. By fostering a love for reading and highlighting the importance of intellectual freedom, I will say that the event also wants to encourage communities to engage in open discussions, build empathy, and advocate for a world where every voice can be heard. Ultimately, it reinforces that literature can be a powerful catalyst for peace and understanding. And for background, and as an example of the banning books situation, I will share information that was just released by the American Library Association for the Banned Books Week. Between January 1st and August 31st of this year, the ALA Office for Intellectual Freedom tracked 414 attempts to censor library materials and services. In those cases, 1,128 unique titles were challenged. In the same reporting for last year, ALA tracked 1,915 unique titles. So there is a little bit of a drop, but it's still higher than 2020 when this entire situation kind of took off. Additionally, instances of soft censorship, where books are purchased or placed in restricted areas, not used in library displays, or otherwise hidden or kept off limits due to fear of challenges, illustrate the impact of organized censorship campaigns on students and readers' freedom to read. In some circumstances, the books have been preemptively excluded from library collections, taken off the shelves before they are banned or not purchased for library collections in the first place. Some key trends that we are observing is that there are groups and individuals that are demanding the censorship of multiple titles, sometimes thousands at the time. Titles representing the voices and lived experiences from LGBTQIA+ in Black, Indigenous, and people of color individuals make up almost 50% of the target titles in censorship attempts. And at least in the United States, there were attempts to censor more than 100 titles in 17 states. And that is alarming because this is the highest ever. So as we can see, the conversations are important, are needed, and we hope that these conversations and information shared by our experts are useful to you all and bringing it to your countries and your realities and helping you with any situation related to book banning that you may have. Our speakers are Dr. Stuart Hamilton, IFLA Governing Board member, Head of Libraries Development for the Local Government Management Agency in Ireland. Dr. Buleb Mambo-Tata, University Librarian at National University of Lesotho Libraries in Lesotho. And you met Dr. Jonathan Hernandez, Chair of IFLA FAIFE, researchers at Library and Information Research Institute in Mexico, and myself, Chair of MLAS, Governing Board member, and International Library Consultant. And now I will invite Jonathan back to start our conversation.
Thank you, Loida, for this important overview of the situation in the States. So let's start with the first couple of questions related to peace and libraries. So we know that in an increasingly polarized world, where differing opinions often lead to conflict and division, the need for spaces that foster constructive dialogue is more critical than ever. So in this regard, libraries are uniquely positioned to bridge divides and promote understanding. But how exactly do they achieve this? So let's move to our first question. How do libraries contribute to supporting dialogue and promoting of peace within communities? So I will jump to start the conversation with Stuart.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Loida, and thanks everyone for coming along this afternoon. I'm talking to you from Dublin. It's a sunny day. My job here is to oversee the National Public Library Strategy. And if you're not familiar with the makeup of libraries in Ireland, we have about 330 public libraries across 30 different local authorities. And libraries in Ireland are very popular institutions. We're lucky enough to have a population that are regular users of libraries and very engaged. I'll talk a little bit about Ireland today when I'm answering questions, but this area that we're discussing, that of intellectual freedom and libraries, has been running through my whole career. I used to work for IFLA when we had the FAIFE office in Copenhagen. And you know, the issue of peace and dialogue for me is really one of the most fundamental things that libraries can contribute. Jonathan, I think the simplest answer to your question is, you know, how do libraries support dialogue, peace? I think they do it through their very existence. If they are doing their librarying right. You know, if we open up our doors so that everybody in the community is able to access our services, if we're not turning anybody away, if we are there in the heart of the community, making ourselves available, then we're off to a very, very good start. And I do think the library almost is a kind of symbol of peace and dialogue through its very existence. Of course, you can go a lot further than that, and that's probably what you're sort of getting at. But I think really once you've opened the doors to people and have ensured that every single member of the community is able to access your services, from there you begin to layer programming, events, activities, workshops, dialogue sessions on top. And that's where you can begin to do a little bit more targeted work around particular user groups or particular issues. In Ireland, one of the most interesting areas of the country is that between on the border really of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Many of you will be familiar with the period of the Troubles that finished some 25 years ago, where an awful lot of conflict and difficult circumstances were experienced by people in both Northern Ireland and in Ireland itself. And what we've seen there in the last sort of 10 or 15 years is pretty substantial investments on both sides of the border in library buildings and library services that have ended up sort of cementing the library's place in those communities, in those border areas, because the border between those two countries is very porous. You can have people living in Northern Ireland who will use a library on the other side of the border in Ireland, and vice versa. And I think you then begin to get some quite interesting sort of crossover and dialogue between the two population groups that use those libraries. And I think, again, that goes back to my point about the very existence of the institution itself. It makes itself available, and there it is, regardless of sort of conflict. It's right in the zone where people need it. And of course, these buildings themselves were there 25 plus years ago when the Troubles themselves were going on, and continuing to provide services. But in Ireland now, we've reached a kind of almost post-conflict period where the library has new roles to play. I'll go into a bit more depth in than I can, but that's an opening gambit for you.
Oh. Thank you, Stuart. Yes, you mentioned something very important, which is the very existence of the institution itself. And of course, once you open the door, in case of libraries, there's no way you can close it. And this is why we are discussing this, the many ways, the attempts that trying to close the doors for the people in the library. Vule, do you have something to add to this discussion?
Yes, hi, my name is Buhle Mabotata. I'm the University Librarian of the National University of Lesotho. And unlike Stuart, I'm not fortunate enough to work in a public library. And I've complained many times, why do I work in an academic library? It's so boring. And the public library sector is the one with more exciting things to do. The academic libraries tend to be narrow, but I think over the years of practice and serving on FAIFE and working in IFLA in different capacities, I think I've broken the academic library straitjacket and think freely as a librarian. And I think that where it is really important for us as librarians is to really take our own sense of agency, to be an agent of change, and then we can turn our institutions into agents of change. Because if we see our libraries only as supporters of research or the curriculum in universities, or just as an agent of the city council or province, then we don't take our own sense of agency as agents of change as important factors. So if we do that, then we see that libraries are really tools of change. In my own context in Africa, libraries are tools of change from an oral culture to a literate culture, from a learning culture, from a speaking culture to a reading culture. And so we take our role as really a sense of age, a sense of a transformation agency. So in terms of peace, in many parts of Africa, there's different types of conflicts. I think Northern Ireland and Irish conflict is well documented, but there are many undocumented conflicts across the continent in Africa. And I often say that books on a shelf give us an idea. Books sitting on a shelf containing different ideas don't quarrel. I've never found two books containing diverse views quarreling. And there's a sense in which that sets a platform for the library, that ideas can coexist without quarreling. Ideas can coexist and allow for a solution to be found without having a conflict. So libraries are really an ideal place because ideas can coexist. and two, for us as librarians, if we take on our agency role, then we can be agencies of transformation in conflict situations. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Wule. Well, this is really interesting to see different perspective from Africa and from Ireland. So, so we can have this great overview of libraries for this perspective for libraries in regard of peace. So you mentioned something really important, Wule, that ideas can coexist, and well, there is no best place for this than the library. And well, of course, the agent of change. Definitely, we need to see ourselves, libraries and librarians, as agents of change in many regards. By building peace, by combating misinformation and disinformation. We're going to talk about this later. So, speaking of this, can you share? I mean, Stuart have mentioned something, but can you share an example of how access to diverse perspective in libraries has helped resolve conflicts or foster understanding?
So I don't know how many of us, Stuart has probably read it many times. There's an article by Peter Loy a few years ago that was about libraries and peace. And when I find it, I'll put it on. It just occurred to me to share it, and it pointed to many libraries, but there's one in particular that comes to my mind, and that's the library at the Center for Peace Resolution in Cape Town. And the library doesn't only serve as a collection of books, but it also serves as a meeting space for peace advocates. And that to me is really an example of what the library is doing. It's not only providing the ideas to coexist on the shelf, but going a step further and saying, here is a space in which we can typically and largely focus on finding conflict. And if you know the history of not only South Africa, but Southern Africa is one divided by race and groups and ethnicity. I think it's similar to Northern Ireland, it's different ethnicities and religion quarreling. But many of our communities in Southern Africa were divided by race: Zimbabwe, South Africa, Namibia, and even in the post-apartheid areas, other conflicts. So spaces like the Center for Peace and Resolution are really important. I read another article about a situation in Zimbabwe, which has also forced a lot of post-apartheid or post-colonial conflicts, and the colleagues there were saying, as librarians, they've purposed that in their organizations, within ZOC, within their library associations, they will work peacefully and not let national conflicts affect their work. And even in delivering service to their communities, that they would not let the national conflicts affect the quality of their work. So not only are libraries providing space and resources, but they are actively creating peace as institutions.
Jonathan,
Yep.
in terms of I think one of the most important things that's happened in the most recent period for many European libraries in terms of fostering understanding relates to the conflict in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. And in Ireland, but also with many of my European colleagues, there's been a huge exodus of refugees from Ukraine, and they've settled in multiple European countries. What we've seen here in Ireland has been replicated across the continent, where libraries have reached out actively to incoming Ukrainian populations to offer them the chance to become library members, to use library services, and to really bring those people into their communities. And then, as I said in my first answer, it's about layering things on top of this. And what we also see is events and activities taking place where people from recently arrived populations can engage with library services and can meet people from, shall we say, settled populations. And I think this is something the library does very well. And I think it's not really about asking one set of people to sit on one side of a table and talk to people on the other. It's about knitting club, or it's about book club. It's about things that libraries can offer where different people can come along and be themselves in this kind of peaceful, calm context. And I think in Ireland, we've been quite successful in sort of bringing our new communities together through some of these library activities. And I would say that's gone on all over Europe. And I know that obviously the Ukrainian situation as it is unfortunately not going to be the last of its kind. And it's not the first of its kind. And libraries have done this sort of thing for many, many years when conflicts have displaced populations. So it is something by now which you know, library work, we're kind of, it's part of our armory, shall we say. We can do this, and we do it.
Yeah, and just to add, just another example is the work that many libraries did across Europe with the refugees from Syria and Afghanistan, and helping people learn the local language and find someone to translate for them. And libraries have done that very well.
Thank you. I mean, with these examples, we can see the diverse perspective in which libraries can help building peace for different societies. I would like to share just a brief example in the Latin American context. In 2017, there was this project, Building Peace Through Libraries in Colombia, because as you may know, since the 60s, well, Colombia has been in a state of civil war with especially the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. So there has been many conflicts during the past years. So this was a partnership with Libraries Without Borders to create a program that leveraged culture as a tool to secure a lasting and meaningful peace. So they create these ideas box projects to work together with librarians to help librarians promote peaceful communities and bringing access to information to local and rural communities. This was an exciting project, and of course, we have to put it in the context of the Latin American communities and the civil war that was happening in Colombia. So I would like to highlight a couple of things that from this discussion. The first of all is that don't let national conflicts affect our work as a librarian. So this, I think that this is an important remark from you, Bule, that we need to discuss later, and we need to think about how the national conflicts affect our work and how we can tackle these conflicts, you know. So of course, with the stewards, we can see how libraries can offer a diverse services, and no matter how they are big, small, or whatever, they are building peaceful societies. So I'm coming back to you, Loida, for the second part of this webinar.
Thank you, Jonathan. I wanted to add to the conversation about the role of libraries, perhaps in supporting and promoting peace, that this is an election year here in the States and in many countries around the world. And at least from my end of things here in the United States, library associations and consortia have also developed programming for the staff, for the library workers, around the topics of democracy, peace, and conflict resolution, to bring some type of tools and support to the library workers that are facing, you know, they are serving the community that, as our speakers mentioned, they're coming with diverse perspectives and not always agreeing on things. And it's very important because our communities are very polarized. And so how can we, and this is another kind of aspect to our conversation, how can we help our library workers? And so that type of event, it's been happening during these months leading to elections here are in November. And the Urban Libraries Council had an event just last week about empowering libraries to strengthen civic health and democracy. And I know that ALA is going to have a sort of think tank event where there will be interactive spaces for librarians to come together, talk about their reality, and then try to find solutions, problem solving. And I am coordinating that event. And it's about democracy, peace, and conflict resolution together with library workers. So I'm very excited about that because it gives us an opportunity to support our library workers as well. But this also takes us to another aspect of all these, right? The perhaps misinformation, mistrust, fake news that some people call them like that. But at the center of it is the freedom to read. And that it's so important. It just, I think what really allow us to continue being and having this sort of world that we have where most of the world can experience democracy and a type of sort of harmonious existence overall. There are always problems, of course. And so my interest this morning to ask to our speakers are, why is the freedom to read essential in maintaining democratic values? And of course, these are wide scope questions and you can tackle them however you like. I will start with Stuart.
Well, I think freedom to read is in itself a democratic value. So I think that's kind of fundamental for me. But having said that, why is it? What's the relationship between that and protecting democracy? For me, it's about choice. It's about the choice to make your own decisions in terms of what information you access. It's about ultimately the sort of choice to read the stories that you want to read. And then, you know, in a democratic society, to vote for who you want to vote for. If there are roadblocks put in the way of you accessing the sort of information you need to make a full and considered decision, particularly in the context of that last piece, the voting, then really you're basically you're undermining democracy. I feel the more you kind of put barriers on where thoughts and stories can be found and where people can access them, the more you're undermining people's ability to fully contribute to a democracy, in my opinion. So by defending the right to read, by defending people's rights to access information freely, I think we, libraries, our supporters, are doing a huge service to democracy. And I think it's absolutely sort of crucial that we're continuing to do this because, as I'm sure we're going to touch upon, and Jonathan has mentioned in his introduction, and as we know here in Ireland, there's an increasing volume of voices, or maybe there's an increasing volume. I'm not necessarily certain that the numbers of people behind it are necessarily increasing, but they certainly know how to turn the volume up, trying to prevent libraries from stocking certain titles or holding certain events. So, you know, because this particular democratic value, the freedom to read, is so closely tied up with our work, it's absolutely essential that we defend it. And that's why webinars like this, it's why Banned Books Week, it's why FAIFE, it's why, you know, these elements of library work are so important. But for me, fundamentally, it's a democratic value in itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We are in agreement about that.
I realize I'm kind of preaching to the converted, I guess. But,
well, you know, you never know who's going to listen to the recording. Could be students,
but, you know.
librarians in different countries, library workers. Yes, and it's great that we have that integrated in ourselves too. Bullet, What do you have to provide from your experience?
Yeah. So I've always wondered why politicians ban books. And really it's about an attempt to control your ability to explore your world. And because books create ideas or expose us to ideas, and so it's that mind control, so that we only see things from the politicians' point of view. And when, as you say, in my part of the world, when the oppressor, when you can only see your world from the point of view of your oppressor, then you really become oppressed, because your worldview is only as a subservient person. And so reading takes you outside subservience. Reading takes your mind out of the clutches of a physical prison. Reading takes you outside the clutches of an oppressive government. And I think that's why governments in my part of the world work so hard to censor certain types of reading. And in your part of the world, as we've been seeing, books are increasingly being pulled out of libraries that explore certain information. But the reading opens up your mind to a new world. And I think as libraries, we have a brand new challenge, as it were. How do we ensure that people's ability to read is not hindered? How do we ensure that we can go past the barriers of censorship to help people to read? Because as people read, they find data, they find information that helps them to counter misinformation that they find in so many spaces these days.
Indeed, indeed. And this is very interesting. Now we're getting into the nuance, right, of these attempts to ban books or banning books. There are two different things for those that are tuning in. The attempt doesn't mean that the book will be banned. This is kind of the petition, the complaint about a book. And then each library should have their policies, or together with the county, depending what type of library is this. And then after a process, the book could be banned, means that it's removed from the shelf. In it, you know, that's an example. We don't want that. But we have encountered, and this is me speaking for my corner of the world, that some of the topics of these books that are being petitioned to be banned, right, the attempt to be banned, are about ideas and beliefs that are opposite to the ones of the people that are petitioning the banning of the book. And there could be about the reasons they may give, and the American Library Association has developed a list of topics, and some of the topics are about slavery, LGBTQ, IA+, violence, obscene, they're dangerous. So, you know, people have these kind of reasons to say they would like to not have the book in the library. And librarians are now working in a very interesting space when they are trying to balance promoting the freedom to read while ensuring that materials are inclusive and respectful for the community that are diverse in the culture, in the religion, in the beliefs, and so on. And these are interesting times, to say the least, and there are some aggressions, and there's some violence too included. And so these are very serious matters, and that's why the freedom to read is very important for us, one of the cornerstones of librarianship. And so my interest now for our speakers, to ask our speakers, is how the libraries balance that, promoting the freedom to read while ensuring that the materials are inclusive and respectful in this very diverse and different cultures that we served at different types of libraries, not only, you know, public school academic libraries. Bule, we'll start with you.
Yeah. I think the starting point for any library is to have a collection development policy that speaks to inclusivity, that includes freedom of access to information. And Jonathan, I'm just wondering if as FAIFE we've ever developed guidelines to developing a collection development policy that includes freedom of access to information, because it's a critical tool to frame it in your policy. Then you can defend it when you're attacked. That my policy says I shall have diverse views. I shall not censor. My policy says, so it works as an instrument that enables librarians to work freely within their work. So starting point would be a collection development policy. The second one, I think, is courage. Courage to be an agent of change. That there may be loud voices, as Stuart says, and they are louder and louder that want to prevent the hearing of other voices. And we must have the courage and the approaches that will enable us to say, let's hear other voices without threat, without getting into conflict. Let's hear other voices. What voices are not around this table? So that as librarians, as libraries, as communities, we can include other voices. So it's how to, I think librarians need to learn to walk that minefield and ensure inclusivity as a, and my third point is how do librarians balance that? Again, is in the values of the library. What are the values of that library? I said I've had the misfortune of working in academic libraries in this sort of context, but one of the values that I subscribe to strongly is the value of inclusivity, because when the value of inclusivity is enshrined, I can protect my community and my colleagues from any pressures outside that would seek to exclude others, exclude other opinions, and exclude other views. So I'll stop there with those three.
Amazing. Stuart, over to you.
I'm going to pick three words out from Buchle's comments: courage, learning, and professionalism. I might have added there, but I think what you were talking about there is the ability of the librarian to foster that environment. And I think courage and professionalism are two things that come with experience, and we can't necessarily expect everybody to walk into the library on their first day kind of ready to go in this context. And I say that because we've experienced, certainly in Ireland, for many of our staff who've had to deal with a very small band, but an active band nevertheless, of protesters that have been kind of roving the country, to be honest. It's been a very difficult and daunting situation to be faced with when people come through the doors of the library and they actively want you to remove something from the shelves, because some of these people are quite aggressive. They've been coming in with cameras and filming staff. And, you know, that sort of training, to be honest with you, you don't get in library school, how to deal with that sort of situation. So we have to be mindful that our library staff are real people as well. And we have these ideals that we want to reach up to and we want to meet, which I definitely think that's got to be a direction of travel as a profession. But then we have a gap, perhaps, about what happens when all of a sudden you're confronted with a very difficult intellectual freedom, book banning, aggression situation. And I think there, it's the learning, it's the training piece that we have to do as a profession in order to support the courage and the professionalism that I think we are going to need to pay quite a lot of attention to in the coming years. And I think the COVID period was also kind of interesting when you looked at some of the dialogue across the profession, when we librarians were being asked to do an awful lot more, perhaps outside of our usual boundaries. And there's any number of examples of us being sort of vaccine centers or doing things which I believe the descriptor of vocational awe became kind of part of the parlance about librarians. They can do anything, but we can only do things if we are supported to do them. And I think that's really important to think about the infrastructure that's on the back end that enables library staff to defend intellectual freedom. And then the last piece, Loida, I would say, I mean, you're asking about how we sort of balance this out, because it is really difficult. There's no denying that we're now being presented with difficult opinions to balance in many different areas. You've mentioned just a couple of them: LGBTQI+, trans rights. These are things which librarians have been dealing with in places. I know colleagues in Vancouver and in Canada, all over the US, where we have different members of our communities who feel different things. And they are still members of our community who have the right to access our libraries. And teasing that apart is really difficult. And I think Buchle's comments earlier on about sort of, two books not arguing on a shelf, it is very important. But when the rubber hits the road on that, the two readers of the books can definitely get into sort of arguments. So I think it's a tricky one. But for me, it's about trying to build the frameworks for our staff to feel courage in delivering their professionalism in support of these values.
Definitely, I am in agreement with you and Boulez as well. There is a saying that says it takes a village to accomplish something, right? To achieve something. And in the experience that I have from this country, the USA, I've seen librarians, as Stuart alluded, the response sometimes towards librarians have been aggressive, a bit violent in different ways. Some librarians here have been taken to court. Some have lost their jobs, and they have appealed through the court system, and it was upheld. They didn't get the job back. Some received false charges. People invented things about them and took them again to the authorities. These are really very rare cases, but one or two are too many because we didn't see that before. We are bringing good into our communities with access to information and, helping them to understand what to do with that access, how to utilize information and so on. And so there being these instances, and it's very important then what the village does, right? So the libraries have been sharing how they're helping the community, bettering the education and all these services or collections, and not only public libraries, but academic school libraries, and in building support for libraries, because we know that libraries are good, but we need to share that. So that's one piece that what's been happening over here, building support and sharing more, being more open. Sometimes perhaps we need to be more open. And then the other part is working together with the city halls, counties, if the libraries are part of those systems, that they have the structures in place to support libraries, as we have the policies that Boulez mentioned, collection development policies. Counties may be able to work in structures that support libraries. There is the Hoboken County in New Jersey has declared the city as a sanctuary for banned books. So books cannot be banned within that city. And the state of Illinois passed a bill, measure in the legislature, that for those libraries that ban books, they cannot receive certain funds from the state. These are mechanisms and maybe solutions that different authorities and counties can put in place. Of course, they have to be voted on and all that. But I wanted to provide that as a way of sharing different perspectives on how the situation is in different parts of the world. It is very, very challenging, nonetheless, because this requires very long time. And so it's very time consuming for libraries as well. But I hope that that is helpful for those of you that are tuning in or listening to the recording. And that also supports democracy. And it tells very important piece about democracy and libraries. And now we'll ask Jonathan to come back for this section.
Thank you, Loida.
Jonathan, may I, before you go into democracy, I don't lose this point. I think the point that Stuart raised about new professionals would not have the courage to deal with this, people that march in. I'll do an anecdote first, but I'll also make a suggestion. When I started in libraries, I started in a public library, and it was just after the end of Rhodesia, and we had a long list of banned books, and police would come in to follow up if you pulled this out, and the anecdote is that my boss, because I was only a student then, my boss provided a safety net that those who marched in didn't know. She put a bell under the counter that I could press if I was confronted or didn't know what to do and had a situation that I couldn't deal with. And the bell rang in her office. And she would come out and support to deal with whatever situation was about. So putting instruments like that in place to physically support our staff is really critical. But I was also thinking that even as we think about developing the next Building Strong Library Associations program and the next leadership program at IFLA, that putting in elements of how to protect our staff, building in the courage. How do we build the courage? How do we build the stamina? How do we layer our staff that they are protected to do those things that might put them into trouble? Those sort of things, I think, needs to go into a formal capacity development program. I wanted to throw that in so that we don't lose it.
Yeah. Thank you, Vole. This is really important, and I have it in my notes. I have also in my notes the thing you mentioned about the guidelines on collection development, to have a conversation with the acquisition and collection development section together with FAIFE to work on something on this. So before going to the democracy, I will add to another word to this conversation, which is collaboration. Loida mentioned this thing of working together with council, with government, but with also another relevant actors. For example, early this year, IFLA released, together with FAIFE, released a declaration together with the International Publisher Association, with PEN International, and other organizations on the freedom to read, the freedom to publish, and the freedom to expression. So this is important because we have several actors together trying to get into one only actor to work together for this trinity of freedom. So this is important, and I would like to quickly jump into our last question on democracy and libraries, because the digital age presents both incredible opportunities and a complex challenges for democracy. So we have the rise of dis and misinformation, hate speech, online censorship, threatening the very foundation of informed public discourse. So in this regard, what role should libraries play in safeguarding democracy in the digital age, particularly on misinformation and censorship? So I will start with you, Vole, this time.
Yeah, I think that the age of misinformation is really calling on us to up the ante on what we've traditionally called information literacy skills and digital literacy, enabling people to know the difference between information, noise, and rubbish, and having the skills and tools to work their way through misinformation. I've seen relatives believing everything that comes on the WhatsApp message is truth, and everything they read online as fact. And so that as library communities, we really need to up the responsibility to educate communities on identifying and evaluating information. For me, the role of information literacy has become really important in the digital age. And not only limited to people coming into the library, but to be able to occupy those digital spaces where people are reading.
Thank you, Bule. Yeah, I'm taking some notes. What about you, Stuart?
It's media and information literacy all the way for me,
Yes.
all the way. So we have a relatively new national public library strategy in Ireland. It was launched last year. It's got 64 targets that I have to report on over the next 4 or 5 years, all super interesting. If you've not seen it, I'll put a link to it in the chat in just a moment. But one of the most important targets in there is to develop media and information literacy training for all the library staff in the country, and then to offer library users access to media and information literacy training and resources through a coordinated national program. I think there are many things that libraries do that are like super interesting. And as I said, we have a huge menu of things that we do now, from seed libraries to tool libraries to everything that's super interesting. But fundamentally for me, providing access to the written word in all of its forms is almost our core job, followed by providing the means of accessing information online or otherwise for the purposes of self-improvement or actually understanding one's world better, as Buthley put it earlier on. So to me, media and information literacy, supporting it, helping users access it, develop it, is a fundamental piece of library work. I think it should be basically, if it's not already a core part of LIS, it needs to be in the places where it's not. And this to me is the one key weapon that we have to support democracy. We have tons of other stuff that we're doing, and we've touched upon some of that earlier on in the conversation. But for me, this is the one piece. And in Ireland, at least, we're just preparing a national counter disinformation strategy. So it's a government-led strategy to counter fake news, or whatever it was called a few years ago. And it's a very joined up strategy with multiple government departments. And the libraries are very much included in that strategy. So that's really where I think, we talk a little bit, we've got questions about advocacy as well. We need to be advocating for the role of libraries in national programs to counter disinformation, to seek funding, to get programs underway, and to deliver that in the community. Because public libraries in particular are some of the only institutions that can reach right into the heart of the community, where some of Buthley's relatives and my relatives are accessing all sorts of information. So, and that's not I'm not saying that librarians know best, by the way. I'm not saying that we know, what is the correct way of thinking about any one subject, but it's about the skills and helping people make their own decisions. And I really believe that's a core part of librarianship these days.
Absolutely. And if Jonathan allowed me a moment, I would just jump here to say that what you both have described is definitely part of a larger strategy towards the future, right? How all this is going to look moving forward over the next decade, the next years. I think I believe it's working together across sector, multi-sectoral, and in multilateral also efforts. So it's not only the library. Those times are past. Now we really need to unite forces with those that are aligning with our goals, right? The common goals that we have. And I'm so glad we had this conversation today. We have not finished yet, but I wanted to mention that before turning it over to Jonathan. And thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. Jonathan.
Thank you, Loida. Yeah.
So Jonathan,
Yes,
before we leave the topic again, I wanted to say that as we speak, I've missed this year's LIASA conference, the Library and Information Association of South Africa, and its theme is libraries and democracy. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that conference. And our own former president, K. Rasoraka, was speaking this morning. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the conference, what libraries, what are the lived realities of libraries in protecting and promoting a democracy.
Thank you, Bule. This is great. Yes, I see a piece of news piece on the conference yesterday, I think. So this is really, really interesting, as well as this program Stuart mentioned, this program on combating misinformation at a national level, which is very important. And most important is that libraries are involved on this, because usually when these kind of programs, some countries forget about libraries. They don't see these great opportunities they have on libraries, because as Stuart mentioned, it is about the skills, it is about media and information literacy. So we are running out of time. I'm afraid that we have just time for one question, and I see one question in the chat that I think that the Stuart already answered, and I think that it's very interesting, because Laxman said that in the technological environment, even if books are banned by one state, they are available through different online databases. Of course, libraries cannot buy such books, but in this changing environment, what is the relevance of banning any books? So, well, this is important because it's alarming that in the age of artificial intelligence, I mean, we have several conferences, we are talking about artificial intelligence, the banning of physical books persists. I mean, many people, this is a question that many people is taking in consideration. I mean, how in the age of artificial intelligence, this is still a thing. So, Stuart, do you like to, or Bule, do you want to jump into this question? Because Stuart mentioned an important case, which is the Internet Archive.
Yeah, I mean, there is this kind of, well, I think it's probably fair to say that, you know, if you can find pretty much whatever book that you want that's been banned on the internet somewhere. But whether that's being provided through a library is a completely different thing. So it's, you know, as libraries, we always operate within the framework of the law. So you know, it is possible, and in fact does happen, that libraries are prevented from making their collections available across borders and all that sort of thing, for many, many good reasons. But I think Laxman's sort of question, you know, we can't rely on technology alone to provide access to these materials, unfortunately, because it does run into roadblocks of intellectual property law or other sorts of bits and pieces. And of course, in many countries, unfortunately, you may run into a national firewall or other pieces that prevent you from accessing stuff unless you've got a VPN. And if you get a VPN, you're going down potentially an unsafe route with security forces. So it's tricky. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very tricky. And in some spaces you run the risk of being arrested. Technology is not the answer. It's, I think, more negotiating the spaces and being careful and sharing ideas on how did you survive it in your context. I think I would not encourage any library that has been to download a book that's been banned in another space. in case they get arrested, and that would be reckless, for lack of a better word.
If I'm not mistaken as well, though, just I think American colleagues might be able to comment here that I think Brooklyn Public Libraries were offering access to ebooks, banned ebooks that have been banned in other states through their online library to people outside of the state. But I'm not entirely certain about the framework for that. But I think it was a proactive piece of work by the librarians there to make some of those titles available, which is a positive thing. But not everyone can do it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that they got some issues, but well, maybe someone from the state can say this in a more expanded way. So thank you very much, Vule, Stuart. Just one phrase of one comment for ending this session that you would like to add.
Courage.
Courage. Yes, you're right.
Yeah,
courage.
and collaborating. So we learn from each other. I think it could be important for us to share information on how we've navigated the minefield.
Definitely, I think that's the word for this webinar, for this session, courage. We need courage for defending our libraries, for defending intellectual freedom, and for promoting peaceful societies. Once again, thank you very much, Vule and Stuart, for being our presenters today. And thank you very much for all the attendees. And I would like to share that FAIFE will release a survey on intellectual freedom for library association and libraries and librarians. So in order to build a toolkit for libraries in promoting intellectual freedom. So keep in touch on the IFLA communication list. And well, we will upload this webinar through our social media. And thank you very much to all of you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.